Is the Quran inspired? Was Muhammad a prophet? Maybe, but I personally don't believe so. I just wanted to give a couple reasons why I personally don't believe that Islam is the correct religion, and why I personally prefer Christianity. Because if I seriously want to represent my own faith, I want to seriously sit down and talk about this topic with love and respect for other religions. So some of you watching right now might be a Muslim, and I just want you to know that I'm not trying to agonize you, okay? I just want to have a discussion about why I personally have issues with the Islamic faith. If you disagree with me at any point, just leave a comment telling me what you disagree on, and then, who knows, maybe we can talk it out some more and have a good conversation. Now, before I get started on my reasons as to why I'm not a Muslim, let me just go into a few things that don't affect me one way or the other when it comes to my opinion on Islam. These are the arguments that I see Christians use to discredit Muslims, but I don't think they're really good arguments for one reason or another. Like, for instance, when Christians say that Islam is a violent religion, okay, like, have you seen Christian history? I mean, if you're going to point out all the violent things that people have done in the name of Islam, then you can't shy away from all the violent things that people have done in the name of Christendom. Like, just because our religion teaches us to turn the other cheek, that doesn't mean we've always been obedient to that rule this entire time. Now, I know that some people are going to argue, but that's different. The Quran actually tells them to commit murder. Again, we have that in our own religion. Just look at the book of Joshua. So, like, anytime the Quran mentions Allah commanding violence, it's for a specific group of followers towards a specific pagan group at a specific time in history. Aside from an astoundingly small minority, Muslims don't actually think they need to attack non-believers. And you can call me whatever you want, but I genuinely believe them when they say that Islam is a religion of peace. Another argument I don't like is, the Quran is full of contradictions, so it can't be right. I mean, I don't 100% disagree with this statement, but the argument itself is weak. Like, how many times have you ever heard a Muslim say the same thing about the Bible? And what's our answer every single time? No, it's not contradictory, you're just not reading it in the right context. Now, I want to be clear here. Yes, I do believe that inconsistencies exist in the Quran, but that statement alone isn't good enough to be taken at face value. You have to bring up which individual passages are contradictory, and then you need to give the context that makes them contradictory. Otherwise, you're no different than the people who say, the Bible says you can't eat pigs, so you sin every time you eat bacon. Again, I believe that inconsistencies in the Quran exist, but I feel like a lot of people who say that don't actually know what the inconsistencies are. And finally, the last argument that doesn't impact my view of Islam one way or another is Aisha. Look, I don't know what Arab culture was like back then. I can't tell you how young acceptable brides were back then, or if Muhammad ever consummated their marriage. Is it likely that he did? Probably, yeah. But the Bible doesn't give us a baseline age for when taking a bride would be acceptable, and I'm just going to throw this out there. A lot of the wives you see in the Bible were a lot younger than you'd expect. Again, we can say ew all we want, but that doesn't in and of itself mean that Muhammad wasn't a prophet or that the Quran is false. Now, having said all of that, let me go into the reasons why I do believe that Muhammad wasn't a prophet and why I don't think that the Quran is inspired. Starting off, we have the Gospels and the Quran. So one key takeaway you need to remember is that the Quran was written by one person, Muhammad, the prophet himself. Muslims believe that the words in the Quran are directly from God, given to the Prophet Muhammad, but that means that we only have the one source. It means that he gets to say, trust me bro, and we're just left to believe it all happened. Now, contrast this with Christianity, where we get 4 different Gospels, none of which were written by the person we worship. I understand that there was a Q source that contributed to the Synoptic Gospels, but every single one of the Gospel writers lived during the time of Jesus and was able to write down the events that took place, 2 of which were actual disciples of Jesus himself, which brings me to my next point. Because Muhammad was the one to preach Islam and be its prophet, there's already a conflict of interest, especially if he's the last one. Listen, even if you're Muslim, you can't deny that Muhammad was able to immediately profit off of Islam. The first pillar of Islam is that Muhammad was the greatest of all the prophets. He basically had people worshiping him while he was on earth, and I know Jesus was also worshipped, But Jesus also specifically told people, hey, don't tell anyone that I'm the Messiah. The people just had to figure it out based on what they already knew about the Messiah and how Jesus fit that description. Plus, Jesus didn't exactly have a cushy life. Now, a Muslim might immediately point out that Muhammad was banished from Mecca, but he also managed to come back with an entire army of converts to take over Mecca and make himself their ruler. Jesus wasn't like that. He wasn't trying to become a political ruler. He just wanted to fulfill the law of Moses. That's it. Muhammad also had multiple wives, which again, probably wouldn't have been possible if he wasn't the leader of his religion. Meanwhile, let's look at the apostles real quick, 11 of whom were killed just for preaching their faith. They were completely ostracized from their Jewish communities, and the Romans weren't exactly happy about them either. They had nobody but each other, and even then, they were told not to fight back. Jesus said to pray for their rulers, to turn the other cheek, even to pay taxes to Caesar. In case you didn't know, the Jews during this time period did not like Rome, and that only got worse under Nero. The early Christians had literally nothing to gain, which tells me that they only did it because they genuinely believed in it. I also find it fascinating that Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but not the final prophet. It's interesting to me that they believe in the second coming of Jesus, but that Muhammad is the one who is the most venerated of all the prophets. Muhammad is also seen as the only prophet after Jesus. It's just hard for me to come to the conclusion that says Jesus wasn't the finality of the prophets and that Muhammad was also a prophet, but oh, by the way, he's really the last one and he's also the best one because he says so. To me, this at least sounds like someone who took hold of a pre-existing religion and then just added himself at the end with teachings that just so happened to benefit him while he was here on Earth. Now, you might hear that and say, he lived in a polytheistic community. The entire reason he was banished in the first place was because he said that there was only one God. Yes, and you would be right. But there were also Christian offshoots in the area that believed in Jesus as a prophet, but didn't believe in his divinity. Just look at Arianism. Muhammad was a traveling merchant, which led him to places where he got a lot of exposure to both Judaism and Christianity. And the branches that were most popular in those areas were the ones that didn't accept that Jesus was God, which also happens to be what the Quran teaches. And finally, there's one major issue that keeps me from believing in Islam. Muhammad seemed to change the doctrine at various times depending on when it suited his personal situation. Again, it's back to the whole conflict of interest thing. Like, the Quran teaches that you're not allowed to marry the ex-wife of your adopted son. But then when his adopted son gets a divorce, Muhammad just happens to get a revelation saying that it doesn't apply to him and only him. Then the Quran teaches that Muhammad is allowed to have more wives than his followers. Muhammad told his followers to pray towards Jerusalem. But then when he started having tensions with the Jews in that area, they started praying towards Mecca. Most importantly though, he originally claimed that Jewish and Christian scriptures were inspired until they came into conflict with his own teachings. Then he claimed that the scriptures had been altered over time and that it was his job to fix them. This right here is why it's so important that we have 4 different accounts of Jesus' ministry and crucifixion. If the Torah is true and Jesus fulfills the Torah, then Muhammad isn't needed anymore. I personally think it's hard to claim that the scriptures were distorted over time, seeing as how we have records of the scriptures pre-Muhammad, and we have records of the church fathers discussing important passages within the Bible back then, which mirrors the same text that we have now. Not only is this evidence that the Bible that we have today is the same as what the apostles wrote, but it's also evidence that Islam itself is false, since Islam believes that the scriptures were corrupted over time. Let me just say this to finish up real quick. I respect my Muslim friends. I just disagree with them. Obviously, it's my hope that I can show them how great Jesus is and why he's the Lord and Savior of my life. In fact, if you have any Muslim friends, show them this video, share it with them. Maybe it'll be the first step in their journey towards Jesus.